Cake pops are really trendy right now, and they're actually really easy to make. There's a couple different ways to make them, and I think a lot of people are confused about how simple they really are. I think when cake pops first started popping up different places, people were using crumbs from cake that they would bake, and they would mix it with icing and sort of almost mash it together in their hands, almost forming like a clay, something moldable that you could shape that into a ball. Then they would freeze it, and then they would come back to it on another day and dip them, and you'd have the issue of them coming apart, because if the icing and the crumb mixture wasn't mixed thoroughly enough, you might have some pieces that weren't stuck together well enough, and they would come apart while it was in the hot melted chocolate, and then it would get really frustrating and messy, and people would just kind of give up on it because they didn't want to mess with it anymore. But then they came out with this really cute, easy machine called the Baby Cakes machine, and it makes 12 cake pops at a time. You just fill it with cake batter up to the top of the little well, and then you close it up. Of course, you want to spray it with some Pam spray before you put your batter in there. And then when the light turns green, they're ready. But of course, you can pull the lever and open it up to check them every once in a while to see if they're doing okay. But this makes a perfect round cake pop that you don't have to mash in your hands, that you don't have to freeze and let sit before you can use it, and it's ready to go. It's already in the perfect shape. You don't have to use any sort of measuring tools to make sure you've got the right amount in the shape. It's just ready when they come out, and then you let them cool and they can be dipped. So what I do is I make cake pops in this the day before I want to use them and dip them. And then I freeze them, because when you go to dip them in the melted chocolate, it's a lot easier to set your chocolate if the cake pops are frozen. You don't have to be, but if you want fast results and you want to be able to use the cake pop or wrap it up fairly quickly, it helps to have a frozen ball of cake, because that way when it gets into the hot melted chocolate, it'll start to harden on the ball of cake right away because of the temperature change. So I've already baked some cake pops and I have some in the freezer. Wanted to show this, but I'll get it out of the way since we don't need it right now. And the batches of cake pops are really quick to make, and a whole cake mix can probably make you over 100 cake pops, and each batch takes probably less than 5 minutes to make, so pretty quick. So I have the package of the melting chocolate you can buy at Walmart or Michael's, and they are pretty similar to regular chocolate chips that you'd find on the baking aisle. The thing that's different about these, though, is they have more oil in them. So if you are using regular chocolate chips, that's fine. You can do that. You just want to be able to add some vegetable oil to it. So just adding a little bit, just a splash at a time of some vegetable oil while you're melting the chocolate will help you to make sure that if you're using regular chocolate chips, that doesn't get gummy, because it'll kind of get chunky and it's not really be smooth enough for you to dip. So these have more oil in them, and that's why these are the best ones to use, but you can always use the other ones. Just make sure you add some oil and a little bit at a time until you get a thin consistency when you're stirring it and you can tell you'd be able to dip it. A couple things I want to show here before I get started is I have this little mini crock pot, and some people use these for like a cheese dip or a queso, something like that they want to keep warm, because it doesn't get too hot, it doesn't cook whatever's in there, it just will melt it. So it's perfect for melting Velveeta cheese or something like that, but it's also really good for melting these kind of chocolates. So you can put them right in here, and then the cleanup is you just take a rubber spatula to get most of it out when you're done. And if you have any chocolate that didn't get used but you don't want to waste it, you don't have to throw it away. You can save it in a little plastic container, and then you've got a way that you can use it another day. As long as you keep it clean and you don't drop any sprinkles or crumbs or anything in there. So I'm going to get this plugged in, and I'll start melting up some of the chocolate that was used another day so that we can get this softened up and dip our cake pop. Now you can feel that it's getting warm on the outside of this, and if you put your hand inside, you can tell that it's going to start melting quickly if you feel the sides or the very bottom of this. And it's not going to get too hot, but you do want to keep things moving once it starts to melt. You don't want to let it linger. You don't want to let it sit there for too long, because you just want it to move freely until you can see if you need to add any oil to this, because sometimes even these chocolate pieces will need a little more oil depending on how thin you want your icing to be. And they make these in all sorts of different colors, though the color to me doesn't look very great when you buy these. If you bought a green one or a pink one, it's not a very pretty green or a pretty pink. So I say you could use these white ones for everything you do. And if you want it to be a color, just add a drop or two of food coloring to it. And we might even do that with this batch, just so you can see how easy that is to do, because you don't have to buy every single color that they make, because maybe you only need a little bit of purple or a little bit of blue for something. You don't need to buy the whole bag. Just buy white for everything and then color it as you go, as you need it. You can also microwave this stuff back to life. You don't want to do it for very long, so start with 10 seconds, maybe work up to 15, 20 seconds at a time, and keep taking it out and checking it every so often. You don't want to put a whole lot of it in the microwave either. You just want to put a small amount like what I've got here, maybe 4 ounces or so. You don't want a whole lot in there because the heat won't be able to get to all of it. I'm just kind of starting to break up a little piece of this while it's in here, so that way the heat can get to more parts of the chocolate as it's moving around. Another way that you can do this, and I'll talk about that while this is starting to melt, is that you can use the stovetop, but you never want to put chocolate in a saucepan and put that directly on the burner. The saucepan goes first. You put some water in it, maybe about halfway up, and then you can put a metal bowl. Nothing that's going to melt. A metal bowl is good because it's not going to melt. You put that metal bowl inside the pot, and it should be where the bottom of the bowl is just resting in the water that's in the pot. So the water can get as hot as it wants, but because you have the water there as a buffer, it's not going to burn your chocolate. And that's how you do it. You would just leave it on like low to medium heat, and then that way you can use a stovetop if you don't have one of these little mini crock pots. But I think these things are maybe $10 or $12 if you can get a cheap one at a Walmart or a Big Lots or somewhere. So these things, pretty cheap investment if you're going to be making a lot of cake pops. So you can see that it's starting to melt, and as soon as the first little chunk of this will start to melt, and you start moving it around, the rest of it will start to melt right along with it, because at that point it's all surrounded by the heat, and so it's a lot easier once you get a little bit of it started. But you do want to keep it moving, and if you need to, you can unplug this thing, because once it's melted, it will stay like this for a while. As long as you don't stick it in the fridge or anything, and this is going to stay liquid. So I'll show you what it looks like when you add some of this. Not that we really need any, but sometimes if you're finding that you're having a hard time dipping, because that's where a lot of people experience problems with it, is when they go to dip it, they lose the cake pop in the chocolate, and they pull out the stick, and the cake pop is somewhere in there, and they left it and it came out without it. So sometimes having a thinner chocolate mixture, thinner consistency, will help with that. So I'll put a little bit of oil just so you can see what that does to the mixture. Not a whole lot. I just kind of eyeball it, maybe a teaspoon or so, and you can add a little bit and just mix it in as you go. You can see it settling on the top there, but you just mix it in. It'll look gross at first, but mixes in and it'll just thin it out. It doesn't change the taste of it. It just makes it a little thinner and easier to dip. So the sticks that you use, and this is fine, I'll leave it just like that because it's going to stay hot. But the sticks that you can use are the lollipop sticks, and if you buy them in bulk, buy a big enough package, you can get them for pretty cheap. I was pretty lucky to get about 200 of these for less than $2 because something was wrong with the packaging. It was damaged, or a label was ripped off or something, and so I got it down the clearance aisle. So always check the clearance aisle of Walmart and Michael's, because sometimes you'll find stuff like this that you can use for cake decorating, and you can get a really good deal on it just because the package wasn't as pretty as it should have been or something, and who cares, because you're just going to be opening it up anyways and putting it into a Ziploc bag. So we use these long lollipop sticks, but you can use the short ones too, and sometimes you can even find stuff like this at the dollar store that you can use. But these are paper, and so this a melted chocolate will adhere to the paper really well. The first thing you'll do is glue the cake pop onto the stick, and I'll show you how we do that. So I'm going to put down some wax paper because I don't want anything dripping on my workstation here. And I'm going to show you how we glue the cake pop onto the stick. So we're going to use the melted chocolate as our glue. And then I have some cake pops that are frozen pretty solid in a bag. So you take the end of the lollipop stick, and I always have my food safe gloves on whenever I'm doing this. And so, especially if you're making treats for somebody else, always wear some gloves and keep it clean, and people feel better about that too. All right, so you get a little bit on the stick as your glue, and then you want to just twist back and forth with a gentle pressure as you're getting the stick inside the ball. You don't want to go all the way because you might come out the other side and then your cake pop will slide right down the stick. So you want to sort of imagine you're going about halfway through. When you can tell that you're in the middle somewhere and you're not poking out the top, that's a good place to stop. You can set it down. Since this is cold, it should settle on the stick pretty quickly. If you want to help it along, you can set it in a cup upside down in the freezer, like a little paper cup, and then you can come back to it. So you get him out of the freezer. I just set him in a cup so that he wouldn't tip over in there and he wasn't touching anything directly. He wasn't right on the freezer or touching the door or anything like that. So he's just in his little cup and he's stuck onto the stick. So when you go to dip him in the melted chocolate, you're going to sort of get him halfway submerged into the chocolate, and you want to use a sort of a twisting motion to sort of start to scoop and twist. So you're scooping chocolate to imagine you're just sort of getting that chocolate scooped over him and gently. So and you can even use your spatula that's in here to help you with that, to just sort of scoop up the chocolate and gently pour it over him is the idea. You don't want to go dipping him because he's not that sturdy. And that's when people have issues, is when they think, oh, I'll just dip straight in and pull it straight out. No, it's going to leave him behind. He might get stuck to the bottom and then pull it right off the stick. So we're going to just gently let him lay in there about halfway in. So let him soak about halfway so the ball is half covered. And then we're going to scoop and twist at the same time and just let that chocolate naturally just cascade down the side until all of the cake is covered up. And then you have a lot of time to decide if you want to sprinkle it, because if you're going to leave it out and you're not putting it into the freezer right away, then you have plenty of time before the chocolate starts to harden to decide if you want to put any sprinkles. Just going to get him about halfway in there. I'm very, very gently swirling him around and then twisting it to make sure that I don't have any extra edges or peaks hanging off. So I just twist it around to make sure I can see the 360 view of this guy, that I can tell I've covered all the cake and it's good to go. Now you can always let this sit in the freezer. You can let it dry, come back to it and do another layer of this if you want. And you can even decide to do another color if you want. But then we can set him up somewhere where he's going to dry. One layer is good enough for me, but you can always do two. And I've created a little stand that he can dry on. Some people prefer to use the fancy plastic stands that have the holes inside that these can set up perfectly on. Sometimes I'll set these guys upside down on their heads and just aim the stick up in the air, and I'll freeze them that way. But if you want it to still have a round top and you don't want to flatten it out, then you can make something like what I've got right here. So I just have a piece of wood that I've stained, and I use my hand drill to drill some holes that will be the same size as my, I used a bit that was about the same size as my lollipop stick, and I've got how many of these? 6, 12? We got 2 rows of 6 holes in this piece of wood. And what's cool about this is this can be a place for you to set up the cake pops to dry, or it can even be the way you display them once they're finished. So if you want, you can sprinkle them now, shake some sprinkles on over a piece of paper to make sure that you're not getting them all over the place. And then you can set them down in one of the pegs where he's going to just sit until he's dry. And it's a real cute way to display them too, because then they're all standing up on their own and people can grab the stick without having to touch all of them. And just make sure that you drill the holes straight so they don't lean over. But this is just a neat little easy trick that you can use so you don't have to go out and buy those expensive little stands for these. Now, what about color? Because let's say you want this to be for a little girl's birthday party, but you don't want to buy the pink that they sell in the store because it's not very pretty. So I wouldn't blame you. I wouldn't want to buy it either. So you use your white and you add your own pink, some food coloring. And we'll just do a drop at a time because this stuff is really bright, especially the pink. It's very fluorescent, so I don't want to add a whole lot and be too shocking. But let's just do one little drop and mix that in. It'll make a much prettier pink than what you can buy if you buy these already colored for you. And then you decide if you want to make it a darker pink. Go ahead, add another couple of drops and just a little bit at a time because you can't take it out once you put it in. But you can start with just one, and it doesn't change the consistency. It just changes your color, especially if you just go with a light color like this, very pastel pink. That's really pretty. And then maybe some pastel sprinkles on a cake pop that uses this color will look really cute. All right, so let's get this one dipped, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna sort of lay it halfway in there, let it scoop up a little bit while we're twisting it around, focusing on the end piece right there where the stick is, and then let the rest just get covered by gravity as this is just dripping right off of the cake pop. You can give it a little gentle tap, but not too hard, because remember, you don't want to let your cake pop drop into the chocolate. So there's that. We've got a really nice, pretty light pink that we made ourselves, and I'm going to show you one last trick before we end this today. Okay, so let's say you made your cake pop and you've already decided you're going to make pink cake pops, and you can double dip them if you want. Just make sure it's totally dry and set on there, frozen if you can, before you dip it again in another color or just in another coat of that same color. But let's say you want to do a pink cake pop with blue sprinkles, but you don't have any blue sprinkles, but you do have some coarse sugar. So I'm going to show you a really cool trick. If you have these little sprinkle containers and they're empty, or it doesn't have to be, but it's handy to have a little sprinkle container that's got the little pop top that's got, you know, your little holes for shaking the sprinkles out. Save your empty containers. And here's a really easy trick. We're just going to put some of this coarse sugar into this container that we've saved. It used to have sprinkles in it, but now it doesn't. However much you think you're going to use. Don't go crazy if you don't think you'll ever use any more purple sprinkles. Let's just put a few little half teaspoons in there. And then with your food coloring, put a drop of food coloring in there. Very carefully, make sure you don't put a whole glob because you don't need a whole lot in there. Then we're going to seal it up and close the top really good. And this is the fun part. You just shake your sprinkles until that color gets on all of the different little pieces of coarse sugar. And this one came out pretty dark too. But now you have purple glitter sprinkles that you can use on your pink cake pop. So then we can just maybe put a little bit on the top here. And then stick it back in there to dry. To display these, if you aren't planning on having a party where you're setting them up like this, if you're giving them as gifts and you need to be able to wrap them up, you can take a little bag, a little cellophane bag. I have one to show here, so I'll show what these look like. You can get them at the dollar store. They make these, they're really long bags. They're treat bags. They come in a package that looks like this. They're really long, but you can just cut them in half. Use the bottom half of it, and then the twist tie that it comes with to close it up. And then, of course, you know, maybe some pretty curling ribbon or something that you've got to tie a little color on there to match the color of the cake pop. So I might pick a little pink and purple ribbon and tie it on the bottom of the cellophane to wrap this one up. And it looks really professional, and it's so easy to do.